we know that critical raw materials are kind of the foundation for attaining at least some or many of the SDGs, for providing better livelihood for people, for making us the transition to a more carbon neutral world and so on. But what's in the other side of the coin? So how could raw materials mining or impede sustainable development?
Let's just look at a couple of the critical resources as examples. I compare because they're often found in the same geological deposits. One will be phosphorus, another would be rare earth elements, another would be uranium. These, in my view, are all critical materials, and they all thread back in some way or other to the broadest definition of public health, in which I include hunger as well as disease or disease states, because I think what we've tended to focus on in the heroic medicine of the West and the North is more to do with illness and acute conditions, including COVID. What we've lost sight of is well-being as the fundamental aspect that we're all trying to get to in health and eradicating poverty. And in that model, critical materials play also a very important role. What I think, therefore, we have to look at on the side of phosphorus, and it illustrates the problem with all the other critical resources, I think. For whatever reason, these critical resources are not distributed across the planet in proportion to the populations that need them. Quite the opposite in one sense. And a country, it's a big country, but with, relatively speaking, a small to medium-sized population, Morocco, has, at least in terms of declared phosphate resources, something like 60 to 70% of what the world has. Personally, I think that's vastly overstated. There are deposits that we have not fully explored. There are deposits that exist that are undeclared in size and so on. But still, even if it's 50 or 40, it illustrates that 40 million people have control of 40 to 60 to 80% of the global phosphate resources. And as an example, India, with 1.2, I think, billion people, has very little phosphate. So guess what? Morocco exports a lot of phosphate to India. But there's another consequence from that. Morocco produces phosphoric acid on behalf of everyone, and produces a lot of a bio or co-product called phosphogypsum, 5 times as much as acid, which is a problem. Some people define it as a pollutant. I don't. IEA defines it as a co-product. But we're not making very much use of that material at the moment, although fortunately use is increasing. But in that instance, on whose behalf is Morocco making that material phosphogypsum? Answer, everybody's. But at the moment, everybody expects Morocco to pay for dealing with it. The same is true with the rare earth elements. And there's a big fight going on in Greenland at the moment, where a population now of 30 or 40,000 people is sitting on a resource platform with a lot of rare earth elements and uranium. And not surprisingly, and the election that's just occurred suggested that the party has now won, doesn't like the idea of mining these in Greenland. And because I was involved with the European Union's consultation on this a few years ago, it was very interesting that the main reservation at that time was the number of people who were not native to Greenland coming in to work on these projects. And the estimate at that point was between 3,000 and 4,000 people, which, if they all showed up to mine rare earths and uranium, would increase the population of Greenland by 10% in one go, in a way that would disturb the culture inevitably, however well behaved and however well organized it is. That's another example where critical resources are available, but understandably, the communities that have them are not very excited by the idea of what it would take to serve the needs of everybody else, but to disrupt and possibly destroy their cultures. That leads you to the question you asked, I think, of resource curse. And we know from the examples in the Netherlands or the Gulf states, wherever you go in the world, when there is a superfluity of a critical resource which generates a lot of cash and a lot of money, it also generates an awful lot of problems that go with it. And as we learned from the Spanish conquest in the 17th century, if you flood Europe with gold and silver, it causes inflation and then bankruptcy. So there is a long way to go, which is why the UN, I think, is saying we must rethink the whole economics, the whole cost-benefit structures we use to analyze these processes. We need to go back and rethink. We have to do it extremely quickly because the resource pressure is very intense now.